Optics engineering, innovative technology, PTSD, and a little H.G. Wells all collide in this review for The Invisible Man. Hey everyone, this is D, Movieman, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. So, before I go any further, just want to shout out all my new people, shout out to everyone who has shown support, who has liked, commented, subscribed, contributed in any sort of way. This isn't something I thought I would be doing, so for it to now be official and to be letting people know about it, I'm really excited for where things are going to go from here. So thank you so much. Shout out to you guys. So I am officially closing out 2020 with this last review. This is actually the last film I saw in the theaters before everything went haywire. So I figured since I didn't have the opportunity to do a review on it, this can be my last one to officially close out 2020. And that film, of course, was The Invisible Man, directed by Whannell and starring Elisabeth Moss, Aldis Hodge, and Reid. So, when we think about the modern culture of horror and the horror genre and horror films, it owes its success to many predecessors in the past, but none of those predecessors are as significant or as iconic as the Universal movie monsters. This includes Dracula, Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. All of these characters and all these films really help set the stage for what we see as horror today. You cannot talk about horror and not talk about them. So, fun fact, the reason I'm so familiar with these characters is actually because of the 1999 film, The Mummy, which I didn't realize was a remake at the time, but it is a remake of the original film from 1932. And of course, on the Mummy VHS, yes, I am telling my age there, on that VHS, they had a promo that featured the Wes Craven collection, the Alfred Hitchcock collection, and of course, the Universal Movie Monsters collection. And it's crazy to think about that now because I was only 9 and I have really grown to love those directors, many of those films, and it really gave me my appreciation for horror and suspense and the thriller genre. So there's another famous figure within that group who doesn't get mentioned as much, but is definitely a significant part of that group, and he actually precedes all the rest of the characters within that group, and that is none other than the Phantom of the Opera. Now, ironically, that promo I just mentioned, they show the Phantom of the Opera as part of the collection, but they showed the 1943 version starring Claude Rains, which is also ironic because Claude Rains played the Invisible Man in the 1933 film. But it's the silent version of the film made in 1925 starring Lon Chaney that really started it all. It was distributed by Universal Pictures, and it really changed the game as far as the horror genre. No one had ever seen anything like that before, and it really made an impact as far as establishing the horror genre from then all the way to now, which is just 5 years short of a century. So it's crazy to think about that, but a lot of history there. And all of these characters in their respective films made a significant impact in the industry, including, of course, The Invisible Man. There have been countless remakes, spin-offs, and adaptations of the story, which of course is based on the original novel written in 1897 by H.G. Wells. A more recent version of that story was Hollow Man, starring Kevin Bacon. It came out in 2000. And now, of course, we have the newest take on the story. So initially this film was going to be a part of the Dark Universe, and that was going to be a modern, updated, interconnected cinematic universe of all of these monsters, similar to the original films. That actually was the first shared universe of its kind in film. Unfortunately, the film that was supposed to kick this off, the 2017 remake of The Mummy starring Tom Cruise, did not go over well, so plans for that were scrapped. I think it would have been a cool idea, it would have been something interesting to see, but alas, it didn't work out. And now here we are, 2020's The Invisible Man. Now, this take on the story concerns a young woman named Cecilia, who is trapped in an abusive and controlling relationship with Adrian, who is a wealthy optics engineer and businessman. However, she does manage to escape from him with the help of her sister Emily, and she's able to hide out with a good friend of hers named James and his daughter Sydney. Shortly after, she finds out that Adrian has committed suicide and finds out that in his trust, he has left behind $5 million for her. Well, everything would seem to be all good now, right? However, as these strange occurrences begin to happen, she begins to feel like she is not alone. Now, is this just her mind playing tricks on her? Or is Adrian truly not dead? So I will start off with the pros because there were quite a few pros for this film. I was pleasantly surprised. So as I mentioned, this film is directed by Leigh Whannell. He He made his directorial debut with Insidious Chapter 3, and he also directed the film Upgrade, a film I enjoyed immensely, and now of course he is directing The Invisible Man. One thing I really loved about Upgrade is that he took this whole idea of technology and the future and made it something relatable but also very creepy. I think there were aspects of that film in the end that felt horror-esque, even though it wasn't necessarily a horror film. And it really blended all of those elements together really, really well. So I like that he did something similar here with The Invisible Man. There are a lot of ideas of technology and how it could really wreak havoc in people's lives. And because we are a tech-driven society, it's very difficult to get away from technology. So what happens then when someone within that industry decides to take it a step further and use that technology to do unimaginable things? And I love how that was incorporated into this story. I definitely have to speak on the cinematography for this film. I absolutely loved the cinematography. I love how crisp and sharp everything looked. And even more impressively, I loved the budget for this film. And I was actually shocked by the budget once I realized what it was. This film was made for $7 million. Not 17 million, not 70 million, $7 million. And this film literally looks like it could be twice, 3 times that amount. It looks like it could be even 10 times that amount, if I'm really being honest. And I love that because I think Hollywood has this over-reliance on big budgets. And I think there are some films that justify big budgets because you have graphics, you have CGI, you have big name actors, you have a lot that goes into a budget. But I also think sometimes it's big budget for the sake of big budget. And that can be to a film's detriment because I feel like sometimes filmmakers rely on the fact that they have all this money and they can take all these avenues as far as how the film looks, but then we get away from the substance of the film. And I've seen where films with lower budgets are a lot more effective from a storytelling perspective because we're not just relying on money. It kind of forces you to be more creative about how we're going to tell the story and how we're going to incorporate all these characters and the development, all of that. It also definitely helps as far as making back your money. This film was made for $7 million. It made $143 million at the box office. So I think that lower budgets can go a long way, especially when you have talented people who know what they're doing and can really make the visuals and the whole style of it pop the right way. And this film definitely did that. Another thing I appreciated was the story. I think that this film incorporates horror in a very realistic way. I think that when it comes to the horror genre, it's become very obvious. Horror is really more than just jump scares. There's really a complexity to what horror looks like and what it is. Unfortunately, the way Hollywood does things, I think we've become accustomed to seeing horror in one specific way or maybe 2 or 3 kinds of ways. We have Paranormal Activity, we have Insidious, we have Annabelle, we have these very specific points of view as far as horror. So when we have something that kind of veers from that, it doesn't feel horror, even though the ideas and the type of story it's telling can very much be considered horror, you know? So I like the fact that this film took this whole concept of technology and all of that, but it paired it with a very realistic story regarding domestic violence and how damaging and traumatizing that experience can be. And I think through the eyes of Cecilia, this film weaves together the trauma of abuse, the guilt of survivor's remorse, and the lingering effects of PTSD and Stockholm Syndrome. There's a lot that happens in an abusive relationship, and it's beyond just the physical. There is a mental and emotional rewiring that happens there, and it's very difficult to break free from, even once you're out of that situation. And then on top of that, the film also plays into the fear of being home by yourself and not necessarily knowing if you're alone. And it can be something as simple as the water's dripping or something falls, or, you know, the house settling or making noise because someone's driving past. But I think that idea of not being safe in your own home is also something that's woven into the story. So it really makes it all the more relatable that Cecilia is trying to break through her experiences, but she legitimately does not know if she is safe based on what she's been through. So I think that's a really cool idea, to have aspects of this film that are scary because we can identify in some way or another with what that would look like if it were us, or what it looks like for people who experience that or have experienced that. That is a lot to balance in one film, all of these heavy themes and ideas, but I think this film does it effortlessly, and I think Leigh Whannell as a director does a great job in pulling it all together under his vision. I think in the wrong hands, this really could have veered into like campy B-movie territory. It could have been something that we wouldn't have taken as seriously or felt a little goofier in its execution. But this doesn't. It feels very chilling, very realistic, very in your face. It feels very real, and I think that adds to the horror factor of it. Elisabeth Moss always gives a great performance in everything she does, and this film really is no different. I think she's an important part of why all of this feels so real and we identify so closely with her, because none of this feels overplayed or over dramatic, but it's just the right touches that really bring this performance together and really enhance the film as a whole. I first remember watching her as Peggy Olson on Mad Men. I really enjoyed that show. I watched the entire series, and she definitely was an integral part of that ensemble. And from that to The Handmaid's Tale to Us and this and so much more, I think she always brings her A game, and I definitely appreciate that from her as an actress. I also enjoyed Aldis Hodge in this. I enjoyed seeing a black man as one of the leads. He's been in some really solid projects, including Straight Outta Compton, Hidden Figures, and the TV show Underground. He was also recently in the film What Women Want, and he did a really great job in that, and the film as a whole was just really, really funny. I was also really happy to see Storm Reid. She made her breakthrough appearance with A Wrinkle in Time, which we can agree was a very perplexing and bizarre film for many reasons, which I won't go into now. However, I've been excited to see where her career has gone since that film, including the award-winning miniseries When They See Us, and she also appears in the HBO series Euphoria. So it was really nice to see her in this film as well, and I thought she definitely held her own. I will say that this film shocked me in ways I was not expecting, particularly with its violence also. And even when you think you know what turn it's going to take, it still shocks you. All I will say is that there's a moment in a restaurant that I totally was not prepared for. And before I could fully make sense of what was happening, the unimaginable happens. And I was hurt. Like I was a little traumatized. That scene really was a game changer, and I think when you see the scene, you'll know what I'm talking about, but it really changed the whole course of the film. And as shocking as it was to watch, it really showed that the film was not pulling any punches as far as what was happening between the characters. It was crazy. I was literally sitting there in the theater, like having to catch my breath, because I was like, what just happened? The film really goes there, and it's a lot, but I think it works. It automatically gives you this sense of dread, and you start to doubt how things will turn out in the end, and I think a good horror film does that. So, jumping over to the cons, I really only had a couple of cons, and they were really minor aspects of the film. So if there was one thing I wanted to see, I kind of wanted to see a little bit more regarding Cecilia and Adrian's relationship. On the one hand, I didn't think it was absolutely necessary, because we've seen abusive relationships in films, in TV shows, in life, so we know what that looks like. So it's not absolutely necessary. And us starting with her escaping from that relationship, like, it still makes sense, but I think it would have been cool if we could have gotten a few more flashbacks to moments when she was in that relationship, just to kind of add on to the connection we feel with Cecilia and really relating to what her experience has been with Adrian. Wasn't absolutely necessary, but it's something that I would have liked to have seen, just adding on to the context of the story. So one thing I don't get too deep into with films is like plot holes and logistics. I mean, there are moments, if they're significant enough, I'll kind of be like, that didn't really make sense. But I think sometimes those require an extra level of analysis that sometimes I have the patience for, and then sometimes I don't. There really wasn't a lot in this film where I was just like, oh, that's ridiculous. I understood the film was using the idea of optics, engineering, and technology and all that. So that totally made sense to me. I just think there were probably moments, because it was riding off of that, where it felt like, but how did you do that? Even with the understanding of what was going on. So I'm going to go ahead and give The Invisible Man an A. This film was just about flawless for me. It was a great viewing experience. The performances were excellent. The cinematography and the look of the film was excellent. The progression of the story, and also as a new take on H.G. Wells' novel, I like that it kind of strays away from the roots of that story and really makes something very new, very innovative, something that you probably wouldn't have expected considering the original story. I've seen people say this isn't quite as good as Hollow Man, and I think Hollow Man is an enjoyable film. I think initially it's kind of taking the idea of H.G. Wells' story and riding with it. And a lot of that film is about the special effects and the technology, which was very innovative for the time. But I think after a certain point, it just kind of veers off and it becomes a complete slasher flick, which is still entertaining, but it doesn't really go deep as far as sticking to the psychological roots of the story. It really kind of just like, okay, you've gone haywire, everyone must die. You know, I enjoy both of those, but I like that this is more of a subtle approach to the story. It's not so in your face. I'm big on subtlety, and I think this film takes a very subtle approach to the story it's telling and the world that it's set in. So I really love that. The Invisible Man is currently streaming on HBO Max, so you guys can check it out, leave your thoughts below, and let me know what you think. So once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you at the movie.